Welcome back to Ambivalent Offenders. This is Jamie.
And this is Erin. Hi, patrons. Patreon. Wait, is that
I think
the plural?
it's just patrons.
Just patrons.
Like we're like the old school Renaissance. There are patrons, so we can, go craft up Michelangelo or something.
I don't think this is quite Michelangelo, but thank you guys for supporting our art.
Yes, we do appreciate it. And that is a thing for the new year, to get better at posting on Patreon. Obviously, with the holidays, I'm transitioning into a new position. There's just kind of a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
Per usual with life, but I think things will slow down.
And recovering from COVID. Don't forget that.
Yeah, by COVID and norovirus and all the fun stuff. Now we're getting back into a groove. So thank you for being patient with us. And to make up for it, we have a not quite mini for you.
I don't think it's going to be mini. I thought it was going to be mini initially. And then, you know me, I start writing. It probably could be mini under somebody else's editorial hand, but not me.
It's okay. So Erin's going to be leading this one today. And Erin, you want to tell us, you gave a little clue on Instagram, or was it on the post?
On the Patreon post, yes.
Patreon page, yeah.
Yes.
Patreon post, you gave a little clue and a little connection to a previous episode. So do you want to kind of...
two previous
echo that?
episodes. Yeah.
Do you want to kind of echo?
Yeah, going back to the Middle Ages and this Patreon exclusive, which is one of my favorite time periods. It's one that you're not quite as familiar with, Jamie. And This episode's going to involve some, like Jamie said, some men, women who starred in some of our other episodes. So my historical crush, John of Gaunt, he's going to make his appearance. John's dad, Edward III, the King of England, who features some in the John of Gaunt episode, but also in our Isabella of France episode, or series, because if you're wanting to place yourself in the world of the 14th century, if you listen to the episodes on Isabella of France, she's Edward III's mama. So we've done 3 generations. We've got Isabella of France, then you've got her son, Edward III, who's not the star of the show today, but he's a co-star. And then you've got his son, John of Gaunt. So we're going full circle.
It's pretty impressive at this point in our podcast. We've gone through 3 generations.
Yeah, well, it just goes to show that this family has a lot of drama. If you think the Tudors have a lot of drama, I think this time in Plantagenet, England is very fascinating. And like I said, Edward III, he's going to be a big chunk of this episode in the co-starring role. Today, we're talking about his mistress, the controversial Alice Perrers. I read Gemma Holman's exquisite, beautiful biography of both Queen Philippa, so the wife, and Alice, the mistress. It's called, very apt, The Queen and the Mistress, The Women of Edward III.
There we go. Yeah.
Which I think is a really good idea because it pairs these 2 women together, and which they're so often paired in life. To quote Gemma, just to kind of give you a little flavor of things, quote, Alice Perrers is perhaps one of the greatest enigmas of the 14th century. She appeared suddenly at the court of Edward III in the early 1360s. And within a decade, she had become one of the richest and most powerful people in the entire kingdom. So let me amend that, not just women.
Wow. I don't want to say rags to riches because we don't get a little bit of enigma, but like that is a big scaling.
We'll talk about her upbringing, but it's still huge in terms of social mobility for that time and any time.
Right. So 2 quick comments. One, Alice seems like to me like Victorian name. It's really hard for me to place them.
Oh, really?
Alice.
Well, haven't you heard of the Tiffany problem? Have you ever heard of that?
No.
When people do medieval or middle-aged dramas, those are Catherine or Philippa. There's a ton of Philippas at this time. Actually, Tiffany was a medieval middle-aged name, which is crazy. It sounds so 1980s that there's never a Tiffany in a medieval period piece because people would not believe it, but it's true. There were Tiffany's at the time.
So weird.
I know
that is a really fun fact. And that would, if I heard somebody suddenly call somebody a Tiffany and
be like, oh, are we like CW's reign, or you try to subvert this. No.
Yeah, that's even more extreme than Alice. Okay, I'll give it that. And then 2, my most infamous reaction to Alice.
On deathbed.
Because Edward famously did not supposedly cheat, right?
Right.
He was loyal.
Don't worry.
Loyal king.
If you haven't listened, I'm going to do a little primer before we get into the story. So don't worry if you hadn't had a chance to listen to those episodes. But yes, I will talk about Edward as one of those few historical men, historical kings that don't. I mean, maybe he had mistresses. There's always a chance that they just didn't record them, but it seems like it was a very happy marriage, very happy relationship.
My famous line, I don't remember, was it in the John of Gaunt episode?
It must have been, yeah. It was John.
Well, just me very angry on her deathbed.
Yes.
Wanting to shout, yeah.
Well, I think the thing is, Middle Ages, like today, don't know what to do with powerful women. Especially like Alice. She's operating outside the confines of marriage. You do get, in terms of the evil mistress, Alice is kind of the prototype. Not that there aren't mistresses that are being remarked before, but the evil mistress stereotype comes from Alice. She's portrayed as this scheming, using her influence with the king to get all the money and pretty things she could want. So her name is synonymous with corruption, while King Edward's wife, Queen Philippa, she's very loved. She's the feminine ideal of the time. And Alice is the opposite. She's seen as doing everything for herself, not the country. This is where we're getting our Madonna whore dichotomy, which we love. If Queen Philippa is the Madonna, then Alice must be the whore.
Yeah, that will be interesting when we cover in our next dueling series. We'll have another famous wife and mistress having that context. So when she came to I know you said not a lot known, but so was she unmarried at the time?
Yeah. So I'll get into, just hold your horses. My point is that I think we're going to find a more complicated Alice, multifaceted, than the Disney villain is my point. Just a warning, there are a lot of gaps in Alice's life, things we have to make conjectures about. But like I said, I think comes out much more complicated. And I think her downfall, because of course she has to have a downfall, says a lot about women in proximity to power at that time. Before we get into Alice herself and her origins, which I know, you want to hear, this is where I'm just going to do that little primer in case people haven't listened to the previous episodes.
Sure.
Because she's born and raised in King Edward III's England, she's much, much younger than her future lover, the king. So we're going to acquaint herself with the world and the court in which she's thrust into in her teenage years. Like I said, if you already listened to the John of Gaunt episode, this might repeat some of that, so I'm sorry, but it's just going to
be a good reminder.
Yeah.
A refresher.
Yep. So Edward III, he's the son of that deposed King Edward II. He's deposed by his own wife, Queen Isabella. It's the subject of our series. If you recall, Isabella worked with her lover, Roger Mortimer, to overthrow her husband. And she puts instead her young son, Edward III, that we'll be kind of talking about from here on out. So I might just call him for Edward from here on out. But her son is on the throne in his early teens.
But he's like a puppet at that point. Sure. Yeah.
He's like 14. So again, if you want more context, go listen to that 2-part series on Queen Isabella, because it gets into all those details. But it's when Edward III becomes king in his early teens, replacing his father, that he gets married to Queen Philippa of Hainault, which we did talk a little bit about that in there.
Yeah.
Hainault is a small country that helps with the invasion force to overthrow his dad.
Yeah.
And Philippa's about the same age as him, maybe a little bit younger. It's one of those great love matches. They grow up together. They have a shit ton of kids. I think it's 13 that we know of, but that's just, obviously there are likely much more that were lost and therefore lost to history. A lot of their kids are recognizable, including John of Gaunt, who we had the episode on, and the Black Prince is their eldest son, and he's in the John of Gaunt episode.
Yeah.
And like you said, Edward III, not known to have taken any mistresses for the first few decades of their marriage, which is unheard of in royal marriages.
Yeah. Yeah. Shocking.
Yeah, it really is. And Edward III also loves spectacle. And he's very into the legends of King Arthur. So this is where he creates his own chivalric orders, like the Order of the Garter. So when you think of that classic chivalric medieval king in your mind, if you think of a medieval king, it's probably Edward III. That's his quote.
Okay. Yeah.
And one of the chroniclers, Froissart, who we get a lot of information from, he indeed compared Edward to the mythic king, King Arthur, saying, quote, his like had not been seen since the days of King Arthur. So that's where we're at. That's the court. You also have the 100 Years' War that starts under Edward III. Edward, it's complicated, but Edward through his mom. His mom was a princess of France, so he has a claim to the French throne. And that's when he launches the 100 Years' War. Obviously not what they would have called it because they didn't know how long it would last. But
just another war with France.
Yeah, it's just another one. But that's just a point that it's kind of on and off throughout Edward's reign. So when Alice comes on the scene, to acquaint ourselves, Edward's been on the throne for decades. He's in his 50s. He's not decrepit by any means. He's still pretty active, but he's in the twilight of his reign. Those early successes in the 100 Years' War, those are long gone. His eldest son, the Black Prince, who led a lot of those battles for England, has been sick for a while, and he's never going to recover.
Right.
There's a lot of anxiety, I think, when she comes to court around this aging king. He's still active, but he has a sick heir that might not outlive him. So we're in that slow downslide of a long reign. Kind of think of it like we're past the pinnacle. We're not at the end. But we're getting there. We're starting to slide.
Right. He could be one bad illness or something away from, even if he's in relatively good health for a man of his age at that time, like we know.
Well, think of the Black Prince is only in his 40s at this point, and he's constantly sick. He's on his basically deathbed for years.
So nothing's guaranteed despite any health, and the fact that he is continuing to age like everybody. Things are, uncertain what's going to happen.
Yeah. There's an anxiety. Because also at this time, it is kind of set that it would be like, obviously dad to son. But the problem is then if the Black Prince dies before Edward, which spoiler alert, he does, then there is some question of, does it go to the son, so that would be the grandson of Edward III? Because Edward's also got a shit ton of other sons. He's got several other sons who are adults,
right? Like
John of Gaunt. So it's just complicated.
Yes.
So let's get on to Alice herself. She is born around 1348, maybe earlier in the 1340s. Again, this is where the birth dates are difficult to ascertain. Even royal women, we've talked about, we don't know that birth dates. And Alice is like,
royal. We don't need to. We need to write it down.
Nah. I'm like, should we? No. But Alice isn't royal. Her origins too are really up for debate. It wasn't until the 2000s that we actually got an answer. So,
oh really?
Yeah. So Thomas of Walsingham, who was a chronicler at the time, he hated Alice, hated her. One, because she's a mistress, so straight up misogyny. And it's also because the abbey where he lived and worked, St. Albans, is involved in this really nasty property dispute with Alice. So they're butting heads. He says she's really lowborn.
Okay.
But doesn't seem to be the case. In the 2000s, in the National Archives, we figured out that she's the child of goldsmiths in London. She's born Alice Salisbury. This gives her a relatively cushy upbringing. She's not a member of the nobility, but she's in that mercantile, like emerging middle class.
Yeah. I'm surprised she's in, London, because, again, London at that time is not obviously the London of today, but not even the London of the 1700s.
No, but it's still if you're going to be a craftsman, you're going to be in London,
of course.
But yeah, it's certainly not. It's getting to that point. It will continue to grow to that point, but yeah, it's not London as we think.
Right.
Later in the 17th, 18th century.
And it's not like a lot of, I would say, like royalty come from that, like the Boleyns like are not coming from London, things like
No. She's still pretty low. We'll get into how she gets into the court.
Would we consider it like new money?
Yeah, it would be like middle class. So craftsmen, like, goldsmiths, people who work with leather, those kinds of things. It's an emerging middle class because you also have to think this is kind of post Black Death.
Right.
Yeah. And this is where, like, especially in London cities, there's the guilds that are sort of giving them power. But yeah, in terms of other mistresses, like you said, Anne Boleyn, she's lower down the social hierarchy. She's not destitute. She's not like a peasant.
Pauper.
Yeah. She still had access to fine things, money, a comfortable, if not sizable home, and likely a decent, if not amazing education. We don't know if she could read or write, but most likely she could read because she did own books later in the 1370s. Books written in the vernacular English, although they do point out that there was also a status symbol books. So there could be a chance that she couldn't read, but just had them.
Like owning Odysseus. No, not Odysseus. What am I thinking of?
Ulysses,
there we go.
Yeah, like a very big book.
Yeah, I love Ulysses is my favorite.
James Joyce is my favorite author. Fuck James Joyce. I will say it. I've read Ulysses and I hate it. So if you're a Ulysses fan, come for me. I don't care. Anyway, Alice's future husband, Janin Pears, he's part of the Salisbury household really early, probably around 1342-ish. So he's probably there as an apprentice. He's probably working for Alice's father.
Ooh, here's our CW romance.
Well, he's probably there. She's probably about 13 when she's born, so he's probably in the household when she's born.
Okay, not that part, but the part of like, ooh, working for dad.
Yeah, but that's very, very common. If you're learning a craft, like you get apprenticed out.
Well, of course.
Gives you ties to that family, and then frequently you'd marry into it. So like in Wolf Hall, which we know is centuries later, but that happens with Rafe Sadler. That's how he joins the household.
It makes sense if you're putting in that energy and money to like invest in that person.
Yeah, you give them its ties. Yeah, it's like I'll teach you, and then it's usually a man. Then you'll marry my daughter, and then you'll carry on that craft when I'm gone. Yeah, it makes sense.
Right.
Makes sense business wise.
Right.
And like I said, Alice's future husband, Janin Pears, we also don't know a lot about. There's guesses that he's from Italy or France because of his name. Spelled Janyn. That's how you spell it. It's an uncommon name, but we don't know.
Yeah. Not a Tiffany.
No, it's a Tiffany. But like I said, he's probably around 13 when he joins the household, and Alice is born soon after. So that does make him older than her. Not a huge age gap, but notable, which is also very common at that time. So it's not anything crazy.
Yeah.
We do know from later on, like a document says that Janin was working for the king, so King Edward III, providing jewels. So we think that's the connection to the royal family, at least tangentially in that orbit.
Yeah.
that would have meant that Alice, after her marriage, and we don't know the date of the marriage, but she was probably in her mid-teens, probably about 16, 17, which would be around 1359 that she's married. If her husband's like in the orbit of the king providing jewels, they're doing pretty well. They're making good, if not great money, living a standard life in London. She's the wife of a goldsmith, like her mother. So this is not an unusual situation. I wish we knew more about this relationship, this marriage, but we don't know enough to say whether it was a happy marriage or not. But regardless, unfortunately for Alice, her marital life's pretty short. Her husband dies between 1361 and 1362. And again, murky. We don't know what he died of, but he would have been only about 31 years old. And they didn't have any children. So she's really young. She could be between like 18, 20-ish. So she's a really young widow. And now she has to find a way for her in the world by herself. She doesn't have kids.
Yeah.
Of course, if life had stayed ordinary, we wouldn't be talking about her. But we know that does not happen. Things happen. We don't know when exactly Alice became part of the royal household serving Queen Philippa. It would have been in the years following her husband's death. So probably 1362, 1363.
Yeah.
The reason we know that is because by 1364, there is evidence that she was, quote, said to be undertaking business on the king's behalf. And
yes, yes.
Yeah, we'll come back. We'll come back to that later. Don't you worry. But this isn't unexpected. There's a lot of people from all different parts of society serving the king and the queen. There was at least 180 women who served Queen Philippa throughout her reign. So it's a lot.
Yeah.
So she's just one of many. And while many of the queen's household and ladies would have been from the highest levels of society, it's still not unknown for a woman of Alice's rank to be there. Unusual, we'll say unusual, but not unknown.
Right.
Again, how she got there, mystery. But we do know, again.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm very curious of like what would
how.
I mean, obviously it's a fresh start.
Yeah,
for somebody who just lost a husband, she doesn't have children. It's like London doesn't necessarily providing anything for her.
I mean, she could have immediately gotten remarried. So that does say something that she didn't want to take. She must have not wanted to take that route and decided to. At least,
like, if I'm going to get remarried, I was going to be somebody like in the court, just like a shift in her prospect.
Yeah, but this is where she just kind of appears.
Hello, listeners. This is Jamie. If you want to hear the rest of Alice's story, please come join us on Patreon, where the whole rest of the story, about another hour, will be posted later tonight. And if you're somebody who is going to wait for the normal feed, we will be coming back here in the next day or two with our final judgment and then on to our next subject, which you will see 2 hints on Instagram of our next 2 offenders.